Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome founder and chief executive officer of Delalune Space, Rob Meyerson, to the stage.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming. This is the fifth annual Founders Panel. And so someone might say, 5, he's crazy. There's only been 4 Ascends, but there's actually was a Founders Panel at IAC in 2019 as we were prepping for Ascend and trying to test out some of the ideas. And so we had it in Washington, D.C. So there you go. I'll never have to repeat that. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming to Ascend. I was on the founding team of Ascend starting back in early 2019 and had the opportunity to shape what this event has become, and I'm super proud of that. We've created a new platform focused on building our off-road future, creating outcomes that will make that first objective a reality, and attracting adjacent industries to our conversations. We wanted Ascend to be founder-friendly, and one way to make it so is to hold conversations like this one, an experienced group of founders we have here on the stage today, sharing their stories in a relaxed setting. This is going to be really fun. And our goal is to provide the audience with insights into how to start a company. And over the years, we've had some amazing founders like Cam Ghaffarian, Sarah Spangalo, Andy Lapsa, Carissa Christensen, sitting here on this stage. So let's get started. And I'd like each panelist, starting with Ariel here on my left, to provide your name and your company and maybe a little bit about your business objectives. So,
sure.
Okay.
Great to be here. Thank you, Rob, for having us. Wonderful to be on the founder panel. I'm Ariel Ekblaw. I'm the founder and director of the MIT Space Exploration Initiative, which was like a little startup inside MIT where we prototyped a new model for getting students and researchers access to space. So instead of waiting in a grant pipeline, I would go out and fundraise to make available opportunities like zero-gravity flights every year, missions to the International Space Station, and last year I signed MIT's first ever commercial contract to go back to the surface of the moon with Intuitive Machines, fingers crossed for that mission happening early next year. And then out of the MIT SEI, as we call it, I founded Aurelia Institute 2 years ago. It's a nonprofit incubator where we're working on novel space technology development for the future of life in space. Habitats is our core focus, but we also think about the ecosystem of other technologies, products, experiences that would make it a life worth living in space. And the final part of the ecosystem, this summer we have raised a VC fund so that we can invest in our own companies that we're spinning out of that incubation ecosystem. Including MIT funnel down into Aurelia, but we also invest in best-in-class founders outside in the space industry that fit our investment thesis for life in space.
Awesome. That's great. Brad?
Awesome. Well, thank you, Rob, for having me. Excited to be here with you all. My name is Brad Cheetham. I'm the CEO and founder at Advanced Space. My background personally is in aerospace engineering, and so I've spent several years in grad school and decided instead of writing a dissertation, it'd be more fun to start a company. Maybe more lucrative, definitely not more fun, but we can talk about that maybe during the questions. But as a company, when we started about 12 years ago, our motivation was to find a way to contribute to enabling the sustainable exploration, development, and settlement of space. 12 years ago, there was not a lot of places to go do that outside of the government, and so we started Advanced Space. Our foundational technologies were really predicated on technologies around how to plan and optimize missions, and so that's sort of our first core focus of our business, which is helping people fly and design missions from constellations in low Earth orbit, which we've helped customers deploy, to the NASA's Gateway team, where we support operations at the moon and planning at the moon, and NASA and University of California, Berkeley's Escapade mission, which will launch next year. We're supporting from a mission design perspective to fly the first formation of satellites around Mars, which is pretty exciting. We're really looking forward to that. The second kind of part of our business is in automation and how to improve the operations for future spaceflight. And so our core technology there is our Cislunar Autonomous Positioning System, or CAPS, which is a flight-demonstrated peer-to-peer navigation system for the moon, really built to scale to the future demand of what we hope will be flying at the moon in the near future. And also we've been pioneering in neural networks and artificial intelligence for both on-board satellites, which we'll be demonstrating later this year, as well as on the ground to help enable operators. And finally, we're best known for our sort of end-to-end mission applications. Our Capstone spacecraft It's a 12UXL spacecraft, has been operating at the moon for just over 11 months, so we'll be celebrating 1 year coming up next month, flying the near rectilinear halo orbit, or NRHO, which NASA's Gateway will fly in. We're also excited to be the prime contractor for Space Force's Oracle mission, which will be doing space situational awareness in cislunar space in the coming years. So kind of those three things of flight dynamics, technology development, and end-to-end missions is what we're doing at Advanced Space, and really excited to share some of the stories of getting here. Thanks.
Awesome. I think people have heard enough from me today, but anyway, my name is George Whitesides, and I ran Virgin Galactic for 10 years, but also am inspired about nonprofits and have started some nonprofits. And now, like you, Rob, exploring venture capital as well, and like you, Ariel, with a wildfire technology venture fund.
Very good. Yeah, multi-time founder. Yeah, so great to have these three tremendous people on the board and on the panel today. One thing I just want to emphasize, like small satellites, CubeSats, in space in planetary environments is not that's not easy. Like that is so. Congrats to you, Brad, for that achievement.
Thank you.
People into space, George. Virgin's hitting its stride. Ariel, amazing, raising a fund, a first fund, all the things that you've done. So let's start. Maybe we'll start with maybe George. We just heard the origin of the idea with Virgin, but maybe if you can reiterate it for the group, and then we'll come back down the line on how you obtained how you came up with the idea and how you obtained the seed funding. You can leave that part out because we know Mr. Branson kind of stepped in on that. And
For Galactic, yeah.
For Virgin Galactic, yeah.
For Galactic, yeah. So actually, in some ways, the term founding is slightly not appropriate for me because obviously it was founded by Richard Branson, but I was part of the journey from small group up to a big group, and I think the same journey that you did, Rob, in some ways, going from a very small group of people who were, very motivated and motivated by purpose to, departments and accounting and all the different things that, the organization that's required to keep, hundreds of people going in the same direction. And I don't know. I'm actually more interested in these guys, but it was an interesting adventure, and putting in place all those things is challenging. And there's so many now. There are so many companies now that are doing such a good job. So anyway, yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to you.
Yeah.
How about you, Brad?
Yeah, so our founding was interesting. So we, as a group, there was 4 of us. We kind of set out with a purpose, like you were saying, and we knew that what we wanted to accomplish, and we were trying to figure out how to start a company. And it sounds weird, but it was 12 years ago. It was a little bit of a different industry than we have now, especially in terms of investment. And so we, watched the movies, and you're supposed to raise money, right? That's how you start a company. So that's what we started trying to do, was raise money. And we thought we'd figured that out. And at the last minute, it didn't work out for a couple of reasons. But we learned a hard lesson, which is that the check isn't real until it's in the bank, right? So we signed a lease and started hiring people, and the investment went away. So we became a very focused bootstrap team really quickly. Because we had bills to pay and didn't have the check that we thought we were going to have. So in hindsight, super grateful that happened because we built, I think, a much stronger business. We have taken no outside capital to date, and all of our growth has been financed by reinvestment of our net operating proceeds. But that journey really kind of put us into focus and made us jump in. I think that was one of the biggest lessons I learned from that. Was it's really hard to start a company like with 1 foot in and 1 foot out, and we had the urgency of bills to pay that made us jump all in. And ever since then, we've had a really great journey and learning experience to get where we are today.
Great.
Very good. Ariel?
I'm lucky to have 2 co-founders for Aurelia Institute. I think one of them might be in the audience today, Danielle Delat and Sana Sharma. And what's really special for us as a group of women in the space industry to have found it all together and be a 3-person female-led C-suite team, even for a small team, has been really impactful for us. I think it's helped us attract diverse talent. I think it's helped us have an interesting perspective on the work that we do. Beyond the kind of structure of the co-founders, we had this path out of academia where I'd had a wonderful opportunity to do research at MIT, but wanted to do more than just publish about the future of space habitats, wanted to actually begin working on technology and applying our R&D insights to build a real space habitat. And so transitioning from academia into a nonprofit startup environment, the way we did that was we took some, lessons from academia, so we'll do grants to get funding initially for the organization, but also philanthropic backing. There's a lot of interesting folks in the space industry and also adjacent outside of the space industry who are passionate about the future of humanity's promise as a spacefaring species. And so we were lucky to have a mission-driven organization that could appeal to those mission-driven founders for philanthropy. And then also a special model that I took from my experience at the Media Lab, which is a kind of unique department at MIT. It's where I spun out of, where we also get corporate funding. So to Rob's question about seed funding and how we really got going, we were also able to work with adjacent industry corporations, which is something that Rob pioneered for Ascend, and actually brought companies that are not core to the space industry yet, but they're viewing space as an emerging market or an interesting new domain that they might begin to operate in. And we were able to work with them and get them excited about essentially being a little in-house R&D development workhouse for them. And so we have a mix of seed funding at the beginning of the founding.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay, for the audience, we're going to take questions from the audience a little later, so I want to just encourage you, scan that QR code, submit your questions, upvote the good ones, downvote the bad ones. No, just submit those questions. We'd love to hear from you. How about your first customer? That's always an exciting day when you get that first grant or that first customer signing. George, you want to talk about that one?
I'm happy to. Yeah, I mean, the first customers at Galactic was a really interesting moment, right? Because this was in 2004, and the X Prize had just happened, and this thing that had, was not possible had just happened, right? The idea that a small group of people could create and then fly a human spaceflight system to space was just impossible. And then to have, that was a global news story. And then on top of that, to have Richard Branson come in and say, we're going to commercialize it, created this huge thing. And the interesting thing behind the scenes was that there was not much there when that had been announced. There was no company there. There was barely an employee there. They had one guy, this guy, Stephen Attenborough, that I talked about before. And so they had people FedExing checks, calling Richard, money was coming. And Stephen tells this funny story where for the first few months in his desk drawer, in the back of the London Virgin office, he just had all these $200,000 checks. Jesus. Because they didn't have an account, they didn't have the paperwork, they didn't want to deposit it, right? Because they didn't have any terms, right? And so it took 6 months before all these people, could have their money taken in some real way. But I mean, that's what and that was Richard's brilliance, was sort of let's make sure that there's a market before we decide to make this investment. And obviously there seemed to be, and so everything proceeded. But it's a good smart thing. Richard just started hundreds of companies, and to have that sort of let's test the market as early as we possibly can is probably a good bit of advice.
Yeah, I've never heard that story before. That's great.
That's
wild. I kind of wish I started my company with $2,000 checks in the drawer. It would have been a little easier. Yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah, so same question. For us, it was very interesting. As I mentioned, we were sort of thinking that it was about an idea and investors, and really quickly had to pivot to customers. And we were fortunate that kind of around the same time, we had 3 first customers, if you will, kind of all simultaneously decide. And it was sort of invigorating that the things that we could do that they would pay for, which sounds kind of elementary, but when you're starting a company, it's not so obvious how it's going to work out. And so our 3 kind of key things. One was one of our co-founders was at swim lessons with his young child, and someone there said, "Hey, do you know how to do this thing that we're trying to do?" And he was like, "Yeah, actually, we totally know how to do that." And they were like, "Great, we'd like to schedule a meeting and hire you." And I was like, "Wow, swim lessons. Didn't see that coming as a BD avenue. The other one was we had a big prime contractor who had some really exciting ideas about sort of future technologies and kind of bet on another small company that needed some help because they couldn't handle the work, and so they asked us to come in, and so I was like, wow, okay, too. And then we actually got really fortunate and got an early NASA SBIR grant or contract that allowed us to start pioneering some technology that actually is the foundation of a lot of the work we're now doing for Gateway and on Capstone. So it was sort of all three of these things validated for us. Hey, people are willing to pay for what we can do without, raising money and development for so many years and then trying to sell like a product at the end. So.
I have two models for customers, neither of which are really truly customers, but on the MIT side, in some sense our customers were the graduate students, and convincing them that it was feasible to prepare a payload for space, and particularly if they were not already an aerospace engineer or a physicist or someone with an engineering background. And so early on, some of our first customers were artists, biologists. We had a student who designed a microgravity instrument, a musical instrument that can only play in microgravity. And then as that program has evolved over the years, we're now doing really meaningful partnerships with other nonprofits like Astro Access, getting to think about what is the future of a lived life in space and using zero-G flights in particular to test that out. And then on the VC side, our customers in some sense are the companies that we're serving, so our portfolio companies. And the first two investments that we've done this year, Turion Space Systems, really fantastic space domain situational awareness company, and Pruitt Ridge, a company that's doing a Verve software product for systems engineering and requirements capture, two really fantastic companies that of course we believe in because we're excited to be investing in them. But thinking now about this model of how to serve our portfolio companies in a really meaningful way, what we're doing is setting up a incubation program where those companies can get not just investment, but really meaningful technical mentorship and access to the Flight Opportunities Program that I had kind of pioneered at MIT and at Aurelia as well. So trying to do right by our customers in that sense.
Mm-hmm. That's good. It's a very varied group of customers. And I bet you all wish you could just get checks
in the drawer.
We'd all love that. Let's talk about the challenges of scaling from small to large. We've all kind of been there in the empty room and started. Brad, I understand you're at 50-something people.
Late
now.
50s is how big.
George, Virgin was Galactic and Orbit together was over 1,000 at some point. Yeah. Ariel will be there someday.
We're pre-scale. We're learning how to scale.
So maybe let's start with you, Brad, and let's hear from George. But getting from those first four, as you talked about, to where you are today, tell me about the challenges. What are the things that you wish you knew then that you knew now?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's been a lot of learning, I think, is the sort of short answer. So my background was aerospace engineering, and as any good engineer, I thought that was the hard part of this business. But the reality is that I don't get to do much engineering anymore, even though I try my best. My team usually shuts me down and tells me to go back into the conference room and do CEO stuff. But for us, scaling has really been about learning about the importance of operations, about systems in the business, not in a thermal subsystem or a propulsion subsystem, which is more, I think, comfortable for engineers, but more in like the human resources systems and the capture systems and all the other parts of the business that we have to operate. And so for us, it's really been a journey to identify those key accountabilities and the functions that we have in the business and kind of build an operating system around that. I've been really proud of our team over the last 18 months or so. I've been bragging to some of my other CEO friends. I technically have no functional accountability in my business anymore. We've identified, functional leads for all of the key areas and letting them kind of take accountability for a lot of that, which has been really exciting because then I can focus on sort of the big ideas and some of the key things in the business. I was talking earlier to somebody here and I was like, there are things, and we've been doing this for 12 years, that in the last 2 months I finally figured out. Like some key things, I'm like, how the heck did we operate for as long as we have without figuring out some of these things? And so for me, it's really been about identifying those systems and documenting things like, functional accountability and whatnot, and then getting great people in those roles so that I can kind of, we say, delegate and elevate. So get things off the plate and then work on some of the higher level stuff.
Yeah, I mean, scaling is like a super big challenge, arguably one of the biggest ones right? And building an organization at the right, in the right posture for each phase is super hard, and it's often where people get into the most trouble. I think a good bit of advice is to have board members who have been through the relevant parts of your scaling journey and who can offer concrete advice about things that are, good or examples of things that went wrong that you want to try to avoid. Some of the biggest challenges that I think we had is scaling in inappropriate ways, maybe buying an ERP that's too big, at that moment or something. And the only way that you're going to avoid those mistakes, because you're often doing it for the first time, unless you're a multi-company founder, is to have good people around you who can say don't do that. Whatever you do, that is going to kill you. Don't do that. Yep. And sometimes we had that, and sometimes we didn't, and then we had to fix things later, which is always super painful. And there are all these wonderful pieces of the evolution. There's sort of when you're under a dozen people, and then when you're 50 or 100 or 300 or 500, and those are all different phases, and they all need kind of different postures. And coming up with the right systems is, a big part of the job. I think it's a really good thing that you just said, where you essentially, everything else is decomposed, because that's like a sign of a maturing organization, and also a sign that you kind of recognize, what your highest value is to the organization. So that's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks. Ariel, you got anything to add?
We're certainly subscale. We're in the dozen and below level right now. But one of the things on my mind is how do we keep some of the cultural goals that we've set in place as a really small team, and how do we try to keep them as we do grow? So two key things for us was, one, we played around with a lot of different structures. Could we do a 4-day work week? Does that work better with the research that's coming out about people's happiness and well-being in a team? I was a stickler and required the team to be in person, even post-pandemic, because we were a hardware startup and a small team, and I really wanted that bonding culture. But if we're going to have that on one end, how can we be maximally flexible any day of the week if an employee does need to take time off for their kid or for an appointment or whatever it might be, so that we can have that benefit of team bonding culture, but without the inflexibility that makes it hard for people to come back to work in person after the pandemic. So I have no wisdom to report yet about scaling, but we're very consciously trying to think about cultural values like this, and then how do we carry them forward as we do grow.
I think that point of culture, if I could, Rob, is so important, right? Because it's so easy to let bureaucracy creep in, and I think that focusing on culture throughout is so important. You cannot overemphasize culture. You cannot. It is literally impossible to overemphasize culture, and making those conscious decisions about who your core is, and then everything fits into that, right? And over communicating your cultural values and then living your values, which is even harder, is super important.
Yeah, great points. I'm looking down the list of questions, and I've done this a few times, but I've never had a panel where none of them took outside investor money. I think, Brad, you're bootstrapped, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
We did.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we took $300 million from Abu Dhabi, or 400 actually. I think
you did. That's right.
Yeah, early on in 2010, 11. And then everything else was richer. So until we went public. So anyway, sorry, just to
no.
If that's helpful, I'm just trying to be helpful.
That correction. I think let's talk about challenges of commercial versus government customers, and then I'm going to start looking at the questions from the audience. So pump those questions in. But Ariel, you've got both. So what are some of the challenges you see in one side versus the other? So,
for a small organization, my COO and I were just talking about this in the Uber on the way here, being able to make sure that we have the infrastructure, the ops infrastructure, to handle even one drop of federal money, making sure that we're handling the accounting properly, the federal reporting requirements properly. I think that's one challenge. The other is we would love to be able to do more hiring of non-US citizens. And so we've been very careful not to be ITAR export control related, but still just being able to have the infrastructure in the US to help people stay when they want to stay. Wonderful graduate students graduating from MIT and elsewhere, finding it difficult to be able to get a job to stay here in the States, even if they're desperate to stay. That's something I think I would love to see change in the government relationship with at least a small organization like us. And then on the corporate side, yeah, I guess we didn't, because we were a nonprofit, we don't have equity ownership in the nonprofit, but we do have a lot of donors, institutional donors for the nonprofit who themselves tend to go out and do equity investments in other companies. And so I think we get a taste of that expectation set, what they want to see out of us in terms of a growth company, what they want to see out of us in terms of the professionalism of our board. And then eventually finding, even for us as a nonprofit, a self-sustaining revenue model is really top of mind for me, so that we don't need to be a supplicant forever going out for philanthropic funding, but that we have a model within Aurelia, whether it's the academy, where we're able to charge for services, or if it's the zero gravity flight or other offerings that can make even a nonprofit be really long-term sustainable and still grow. Those are some of the different things that we're thinking about on commercial and government side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is a tough thing to navigate, and I kind of think of it as sort of how do you draw the boundaries of the business or the game that you're going to go after from a market perspective. One of the things that's really important for us is that we support commercial customers, national security customers, and civil customers, NASA and what have you. And obviously, they all have very different priorities and approaches, but and they all have very different acronyms, right? But fundamentally, the physics of the problems that we solve for them are pretty consistent and similar. And one of the key things for our business is that when we develop a capability for one of those three, we get economies of scale by applying it to the others, right? So we try not to stovepipe the different sectors. And what we found is that the expectations, whether it be government or commercial, are somewhat, common in the sense that people expect you to have, high level of quality, technical excellence, reporting, all the things that, some people might think are more government, but commercial customers expect that too. So for us, what we've tried to do is create a culture around efficiency and those excellence and quality things that I think help give us an advantage in some areas, because it's very easy, in my opinion, to optimize for one or of those sectors, right? Like you can be a really great defense contractor, you can be a really great commercial company, you can be a really great NASA supplier, support contractor, but trying to fit all three of them allows us to get scale in how we operate. And it's important because you can't really operate a business where one team is working to commercial standards, whatever that is, and one team is, working in a cost, plus setup in another. You kind of just have to operate with you got to do your best on all of them, and so that's something that we think we bring when we're thinking about customers, sort of universally, and then obviously deliver it into the unique kind of ecosystems that customers have in terms of priorities. And the reports sometimes look different, right? The commercial reports are PowerPoints, and the DoD ones are long and verbose. But it's, I think, helpful to think of sort of what makes them common and not try to divide them up in our business.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. Yeah. I don't have too much to add.
I'll add on just briefly to that, because you made me think of something else too. For our portfolio companies that we're seeing now on the VC investment side, we are pushing them to make sure that they have commercial customers, because nobody wants to see the government as the only anchor customer. But the strategies that DoD is using, things like StratFi, to be able to double a Series A, is really helpful to still see a combination of government non-dilutive funding and then the commercial customer. And so we're really happy to see fledgling companies be able to do both and convince both a government customer and a commercial customer to come to their door really early at pre-seed or seed stage.
And I think there's a panel coming up on Wednesday. There is, because I was supposed to speak on it, but it's going to talk about the differences between sort of commercial and national security customers. And I think that obviously it's its own panel, but I think in the space industry particularly, that's a super important thing to manage, because you're naive if you think that you're going to do this without any sort of government involvement. But I also think you're similarly naive in this current era to think you're going to do it with only government involvement. So I think that's a really important thing to bridge.
Great point. Let's take a question from the audience. So there are two that are tied for number one, but I'm going to go for the first one on the list. Can any of the panelists speak to startups using SBIR grants as a platform for building a commercial company. Maybe we'll start with you, Brad.
You know a little bit about that. So that was one of the early things for us as a business. And in fact, our capstone mission, which is flying at the moon, we own that satellite, but that procurement was actually a phase 3 SBIR. And so the utilization of that program, traditionally sort of phase 1, phase 2, there's sort of an issue at the end of phase 2 because most sort of technology owners in the government who have SBIR funding don't also have program funding. It's kind of a weird way that the world works. And so you create these great technologies and then there's sort of nothing there to catch them. And so what we found in multiple different instances have used phase 3, SBIR phase 3 awards to effectively quickly procure programs. And so we're supporting some work at NASA JSC on a phase 3 SBIR. And then again, our capstone spacecraft, that whole program went from sort of idea in the spring to award in the fall. And that was because the procurement was really expedited using the phase 3. So that's been a huge lever arm, if you will, to the technologies we've developed in terms of procurement on the sort of back end, and also as a creation, sort of a funded IRAD, if you will, right, for creating some really exciting technologies around our system, our autonomous positioning system. CAPS was an SBIR technology, and some of the neural network stuff we're doing is also in that area. So we're big fans of those programs.
Mm-hmm.
Same here, I'd say, because we do deep tech investing and are really focused on hardware companies. Almost all of the most compelling companies that we are seeing for investment either are already, in an SBIR process or they're in the process of applying. And two quick things: in addition to SBIR, there's STTR, so another related strong program. And a quick tip for anybody who is considering SBIR: get yourself into an I-Corps program. It just helps kind of check the box to be more likely to win SBIR funding. And there are I-Corps regional centers all around the country. You can go through this program. They help you do customer discovery. So they essentially pay you a little bit of a stipend if you get into the program to go and do the 100 customer interviews that you should be doing anyway to get your product market fit. So that's a program that we've seen our companies go through to great success and help them be more likely to win like a phase 2 SBIR.
Mm-hmm. And that's the SBIR program is excellent. I mean, there's hundreds of millions of dollars invested, not just from NASA, but the DoD, the National Science Foundation, and STTRs can be led by industry, but they have to have a university partner. And you can look at the statistics out there on, it's really, really hard to win a phase 1, but even harder to get to a phase 2. But doing the work like Ariel suggested, I mean, going and doing the customer interviews and the research, I think that is that's essential for any business endeavor. So it's great advice. If you were to start a business from scratch today, throw out what you're doing. Where would you start, and what is the most appealing market to you? Love that question. So, Ariel, you want to start?
That's a great question. Does it have to be in the space industry? I think I might do a combination space and climate change company. There are already two at least competing concepts here, but I think my deepest passion, if I was going to go out and do it a for-profit company right now, would be space-based solar power. So this concept that you have solar panels in orbit, being able to get incident photon energy above the atmosphere before it's attenuated by water vapor, convert that solar power energy into microwaves that pierce straight through the atmosphere, and then gather and capture really profoundly more efficient, clean energy on the surface. Has a little bit of a risk of Austin Powers space laser concern, changing photon energy into microwave energy. So there's a lot of regulation to be done around it and some good technological development. But that's where my heart would go for a for-profit company.
Big ideas. Yeah.
So I don't know. I'll be honest with you. There's nothing I'd rather be doing right now than what we're doing. This is a activity I'm super passionate about. So I'm going to take a slightly different tack on your question. I was reading this morning, actually, the CEO and co-founder of NVIDIA, which is a small little company that I think is up like 200% this year, right, after going public. And his comment was that he wouldn't do it again if he went back because it was terrible. He goes, it was just terrible to create a company and grow it. And I think there's something insightful in that that's not necessarily like don't start a company, but I think the insightful thing that I wanted to share on that is it's not about the destination, right? He's like the top 20 richest people in the world now. and obviously he would like go back and not do that again, but it's because, you know, you gotta love the journey, which has gotta be learning and figuring out new things. Like when I was thinking about starting a company, I had no desire whatsoever to learn what payroll and all this other stuff that you have to figure out, right? But if you're just thinking about, you know, being a billionaire, because again, at least, you know, our company didn't start with a billionaire like George's did, but, you know, it's about the journey and it's hard, right? And so I only say that because I think for those of you out there thinking about it or who are founding companies, it's a really hard journey and it can be really lonely. I don't want to, like, you know, take this into a totally sad direction, but it's super lonely and you need support. George mentioned board members. I also think like advisors and peer networks, and so find those other people. I'm really grateful for over the last several years to have been in a CEO peer group, and we sort of say it's like, you know, AA for CEOs, because and they're not in, none of them are in space. It's all just like all of the stuff that it's kind of lonely at the top, and you can talk about and you can work through. And so I think finding those, you know, peers, mentors, you know, going all the way back. George was one of my first mentors in the space industry over 15 years ago. You know, I was sort of just an undergrad who thought it was cool to do space stuff, and I was able to work with George. And so I think that's just some of the pieces of advice. If I was going to go back in, I would, you know, double down on those relationships and hopefully end up doing the same thing I'm doing right now.
Yeah, that's great advice. And that interview with Jensen Huang is from the Acquired podcast, and it just came out. It just dropped like last week, and you should listen to the whole thing. That's like the last thing he says, but it's an amazing interview with a person who's gone to the brink like multiple times with his company and made big bets on a lot of different things.
It's the overnight success that was, you know, 20 some years in the making, right?
Yeah. George, how about you?
Like they all are, or many of them are, unless you're WhatsApp. I think there's so many great companies to start now, you know, and so many things. I think that intersection between, you know, climate and technology is so ripe with opportunity now, partly because people have been doing the work to help create the market conditions for them. You know, I mean, there are these huge hydrogen functionally subsidies, you know, for can we create, you know, that economy is really exciting. I think that, you know, all the great stuff around decarbonized aviation is really exciting, and there's going to be all kinds of great companies. I think one of the things that's super fascinating to me is how do we establish a economy around biodiversity, which we don't have right now, but we really need, or else we're going to, you know, watch as 80% of the species on the planet, you know, get wiped out over the next century or so. And so coming up with market structures is actually a really interesting area, which is almost like pre-company. It's more what is, you know, like what some people have been doing is they've been scaffolding sort of a new economy or a new system that allows us to move rapidly in areas of like new energy forms like hydrogen storage or something like that. And now there's all this private capital that then flows into that particular sector. And I think we need that now in some other areas, you know, like biodiversity, so that we can, you know, humans like marketizing things. It's a system that we're used to like figure how to work on problems together at a large society level scale. And now we need to do that in different ways. Another example is forest fires, right? So, you know, how do we marketize the risk? Obviously, the main way is through insurance, and then how do we marketize the carbon that is created? You know, right now we have a really interesting situation where, first of all, I think part of the answer is space, but where we've had these terrible fires in Canada this year. You know, like by some measures, 3 to 10x beyond recent historical levels that have put out about 2 gigatons of carbon. And none of that gets counted in Canada's Paris Convention framework, right? And so, like, that's because it's a natural stock. And so, like, A, we can use space to keep track of it, but B, we may be able to use space and aeronautics as a way to manage landscape level carbon, which is not something that people are thinking about, but like that is what we're going to have to start thinking about over the next 10, 20, 30 years, is figuring out our new relationship with global planetary systems. And that to me is a very exciting opportunity. If the market side is structured properly, then we'll see, I think, again, a huge amount of capital and innovation go into it.
Mm-hmm. That's inspiring. Thinking big. Okay, well we're getting to the end. I want to do a lightning round and ask each of you to share advice that you'd give to new founders who are looking to start their own companies. So, Ariel, you want to lead off?
I'll steal Brad's because I also think it's a really fantastic point, which is figure out how to surround yourself with wonderful mentors or advisors or board members. They don't have to be formal board members. It's helpful if your board members are really, aligned with what you're doing, but being able to curate and cultivate a network around you that's going to support your endeavor is really key. I'm really lucky to have mentors on this stage as well. I think that has been transformational for me, being able to translate between different contexts, academia and startup and VC fund, and then search and be open-minded about the types of mentors that you become friends with, and become friends with them, not just as some type of transactional career, networking situation. That would be mine.
All right, well, since you stole mine, I'll have to come up with a new one. I'll say I think love what you're doing, and I think this is something that may seem obvious, but I've encountered a lot of CEOs and people who started companies, and they were in love with the idea of what they thought they were going to do and not what they were actually doing. And so I'd say love what you're doing, and the other thing is I would say it's okay to, if you have an idea and someone else is working on it, to join that team, right? You don't have to create everything from scratch. I think 12 years ago there wasn't the great ecosystem of companies there are now when we were coming out, and so we felt like we had to start our own thing. But do some due diligence and make sure you're not starting a company doing something that someone's already doing that you could just jump and contribute to, especially if you're like technical or something and you want to contribute at an engineering level, because newsflash, as a founder and CEO, you don't get to do that very much anymore.
Two pieces of advice I give to people. Number one is your choice of co-founder, if you decide to have a co-founder, is like right up there in terms of the most important decisions, and you kind of hope that person is complementary to you. I've seen some teams where it's like too similar, and it like gets conflicted because they both kind of want to do the same thing. So you want to have like complementary co-founder or co-founders. Usually it gravitates to just two, I find, but sometimes it's three can make it work, but usually it's like two people, and they help each other get through everything, and that complementary nature is really good. And then the other thing is just like you have to do something that you really care about, that you cannot get out of your head, because it is going to be so painful, that if you do not have that incredible sense of purpose and just like you're obsessed with doing that thing, you're going to be dissuaded by the pain that comes. And so, you really have to be sure, not 100% sure, but pretty sure that is a problem that you want to go spend 10 years of your life on, or whatever. And because that's often what it takes. And and if that is, then it's going to be the most amazing adventure, and it's going to be the thing that you remember your life for, or one of them.
That's all wonderful advice. If I can add one thing, is most people think when they start a company they need to go out to VCs and raise money. If you don't have to raise money, don't do it. If you can get a sponsor, if you can get bootstrap, friends and family, there's a lot of ways to start a company. Giving up equity is not always the best way to do it. So think that one through. Raising money and having an investor on your board makes it just even harder. So,
well, I think it changes your time horizon. One of the things we found is that space is a tough thing to time, right? George, you talked a little bit about this in your lunch session, but timing is hard, predictability is hard, and one of the challenges is as soon as you take external money, investors generally, and maybe in some of the folks you work with, they don't care so much, but they want their money back, right? Unless it's a grant to a nonprofit, right? So they want it back, and they want it back as quickly as possible.
You're the second person to say that in the last hour and a half. Yeah. Really, today. Like, I'm serious.
You can't be as patient. I mean, I'll just say, like, one of the things we think about, the settlement of space isn't a next quarter problem or decade problem. It's longer than that, so we have to think longer than that.
Yeah. Okay, we are at time. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank this great panel, and appreciate you being here. Thanks everybody.
Thanks, Rob.